1999 The Podcast is a production of the Cage Club Podcast Network. For more podcasts on movies, comics, and all things pop culture, head to cageclub.me. To contact us with questions, comments, or just to say hi, send us an email at 1999@cageclub.me. You can find me on Twitter at probablyrealjb and Joey at soulpot. And you can follow the show on Twitter at 1999 The Podcast. To support the show, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. The show is written, produced, and edited by us. Welcome to 1999 The Podcast. I'm John Brooks.
And I'm Joey Lewandowski.
And today we find ourselves in July of 1999, Joey. And coincidentally, this movie and our next one were both released in the US in the very same week.
What a week. What a week.
What a week. Absolutely. So determining who got to go first came down to a personal call on my end.
There was such internal strife here that I was like, I don't know any of this, but you struggled, you grappled with the decision of what comes first.
I did. So I decided that I'm just going to base it on my own, I guess prejudices is not the word, but my own personal experience of how I saw these two movies. So one of these two movies got a limited release run starting on July the 14th, before it went wide release 2 weeks later. And it just so happens that I stood in line around the block to see it at the Neptune Theater in Seattle during its limited release run.
Wait, hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think we've talked about where geographically you were in 1999. Were you in Seattle the entire year?
Guess that's a really good question.
Because I know that you live in the Pacific Northwest, but I picture you as either New England or Brooklyn and nowhere else. But like, were you in Seattle in 99?
So I was in Seattle for the summer of '99. So a lot of the summer movies
okay.
are going to be Seattle. So Phantom Menace I first saw in Massachusetts. So just to give you a little rundown of where I was in 1999 throughout the entire year, I was in college. So I was like 3/4 of that year I was in Ithaca, New York, where I saw a lot of these movies.
Oh, that's new too. Okay.
I had a bunch of friends in New York City, so I would visit them sometimes. So I saw some of them in New York City, and spent a little bit of time in Boston early the summer of '99 with my friend Jake Weiskopf. And then, so the rest of that summer I was in Seattle. So a bunch of these movies I saw in Seattle. One of them, which we'll talk about in the next round, of course, is a very Seattle movie, but we'll get to that later. And then towards like the end of the year, so like the prestige Academy Award films that we're going to talk about, one of those pretty soon, I would have seen in Ithaca because I was
gotcha. Okay.
End of the year.
And I was in New Jersey seeing none of these movies.
So this one, I was lucky enough that the Neptune Theater, which is a great theater in Seattle, Washington, one of the theaters chosen for the limited run of today's movie, which stars Heather Donahue, Michael C. Williams, and Joshua Leonard as themselves, or rather, I guess it's people who happen to share their exact same names. We'll talk about that in the episode. And written and directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez is the Blair Witch Project. This is an exciting one. I'm really looking forward to this one. This is a movie that I have a lot of like conflicting opinions about, but ultimately is I think a landmark movie and overall a great one too. What are your initial feelings about the Blair Witch Project?
I like it. I've seen it once. Like most of these movies, I will have seen it once. Well, no, not there's a blend. But yeah, I like it a lot. It's one that, and we might talk about this in the episode, that I wish that I could have seen during the hype cycle of it. Like, I'm sure a bunch of the other movies this year, in 1999 that we'll cover for the podcast, I saw after the fact, obviously. And so like a lot of the impact of those movies is not quite lost on me, but it wasn't as impactful as it had been if I had seen this in theaters like opening weekend or whatever. Like I sort of see most things now. But yeah, no, I like it. I think it's a really good movie. I'm very interested to hear what our guest has to think about it, because I know that she is a super fan of this movie.
Well, we'll talk about her in a moment.
I don't want to jump ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's interesting you say, like use the word hype there. And I think I was thinking about this a lot that year. It really was kind of the 1990s, where the word hype to discuss how a movie is marketed became sort of part of the common parlance. And I remember that, people would talk about like The Phantom Menace as a movie that was really hyped. And it's like, is that the right word? Because did you really need to like develop hype?
Anticipated, is that a better word?
Well, yeah, and we talked about when we talked about Phantom Menace about the anticipation, right, and that being a big a word that we should associate with that movie. Blair Witch is a really interesting case study in this because it is a combination of like hype and what we call buzz, and I think those are two different things, right? Like when you say a movie is overhyped or a movie is like highly buzzed about, you're not saying the same thing,
Do you
right?
think is buzz organic and hype is manufactured?
I think so. And the
Okay.
thing about the Blair Witch Project is that it's a really interesting combination of both of those things, right? Like the buzz that was generated was heavily manufactured, and that's really part of sort of what this movie is. So it's really hard to know like whether or not Blair Witch is a product of more buzz or more hype or some really interesting and unique combination of both of those things. But either way, I mean, this movie really is more of an experiment or kind of a project than it is a film. And we'll talk more about that as well when we
Well,
discuss
it's aptly
discuss the movie.
titled The Blair Witch Project and not The Blair Witch Film.
And that's not an accident, right? Because there's sort
Sure.
of there's an in-world reason for that, but there's also sort of an external world reason
Yeah.
for that, right? Because they are doing a project, like a
W
school,
would
on.
you say, and I don't know the answer because I haven't thought about the other movies, is this the most experimental movie we'll cover for this podcast? Probably, right?
I think so. Yeah, yeah, I think it is.
'Cause there's other movies that have come out either before or since then that have been as or more experimental, but in terms of, like, what sets this year apart and all of the, like, movies that people remember, like, this is the weirdest one, even though, like, it winds up being kind of like now you watch it now, it's, like, almost more normal because it's like we've grown
Mm.
accustomed to what it does, but, like, in terms of what it was doing in the time at the moment, it is probably the weirdest and most experimental and, like, could have flopped I think if it flopped, we just probably wouldn't be talking about it, or maybe we would with a different lens altogether, right? But, like,
Yeah. I think in terms of, like, being overtly experimental, in that it was a movie that built its the whole premise of the movie is that the limited budget was like a feature, not a bug, right? And so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
in terms of, like, pulling off that sort of high-minded idea, and then also we wouldn't be talking about it if not for the rampant success of the movie, which I'll get to in a second. But yeah, I think when we talk about 99, one of the sort of underlying features of that year, as we talked about with Brian Raftery, was that there was a lot of like rule breaking and groundbreaking, and some of it more subtle. I think in like The Matrix, in some ways, that's more subtle. In Blair Witch, it's a lot more sort of like, let's try this and see if we can make a hit movie out of it. And in that case, yeah, I think it sort of stands alone in that year. Um, Either way, so it's produced on a budget of less than $500,000 and grossed 248.6 billion at the box office,
Pretty good return,
which is
pretty good return.
freaking nuts. And I should mention that, like, I think the actual movie itself, like actually making it, was less than $1 million. And the 500,000 estimate has to do with the marketing campaign. It was as big a part of the movie as the movie itself was. It was 1999's 10th highest grossing movie, but, and this is interesting, it never debuted at first place.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So a lot of that had to do with the competition. On the one hand, it opened wide against the Julia Roberts and Richard Gere vehicle, The Runaway Bride, which we will talk about at some point. But the second week it was in wide release was against an obscure little film called The Sixth Sense.
Huh. And this is
um,
also while the other movie that you're grappling with in terms of the release is also, like, in theaters.
right.
Man, I know that, like, the whole point of the podcast is there's a lot of good movies that year, but that still seems crazy.
It is wild. It's
Right.
wild that you'd make a $250 million and never be in first place. Like that is just I don't know that there's ever going to be that statistic
Well,
ever
because
again.
now, like, a lot of movies make that, not a lot of movies, but a lot of movies make that, and it's like $100 million opening, and then it just goes
Mm.
away, and, like, something else takes its place, and, like, they all, like, but yeah, it's not like 50 million 4 weeks in a row that doesn't win the box office. Like, that's crazy.
Well, and also I think the other part of why what sort of explains that is that it was a hit movie in its limited release as well. So it was released in 27 theaters, and in 27 theaters made $1.5 million, which is absolutely bonkers.
So
Like
it's
that
the
is a
Everything Everywhere All at Once of 1999.
yeah, I think so. And like that's why I had to literally like it was a line around the block to get into the Neptune for every screening of that movie, and you had to be there like an hour and a half early to get
So
into
was it
it.
the only theater in Seattle showing the movie?
Yeah,
Probably?
until its wider release.
Gotcha,
Yeah,
okay.
and it was really fun. I mean, it was a bunch of like Seattle hipsters just like waiting in line for like a 10 p.m. showing of this really weird random movie. And
I know it's 5
yeah,
years after the
it's
fact
cool.
and grunge had died, but I'm imagining you're all dressed like Kurt Cobain, like, "Hey, man, are you over it?" "No, no, still not
What
over it, man."
100? Yeah, 100%.
Mhm.
No, but that's fine to imagine that because why
"Hey,
not?
that A-Rod kid on the Mariners is pretty good, huh?" "Yeah, man."
Like the cut of that kid's jib.
Yeah.
I believe he was on the Rangers by then.
99? No, I think he was
No, you're
02
right.
by
You're
then.
right. No, he was. That's you're right. You're right. It was until because he was part of the 2000 team where they won like 175 games, whatever it was. A lot of games. Anyway,
Yeah.
I might have just completely botched that statistic in that year, but that's
I think
fine.
they won, like, 116 in 2001 when they had Ichiro. I think
That was
that's
the
it.
one. Yeah,
Something
and
like that.
also Ken Griffey Jr. And anyway, this is way off topic.
1999 Baseball, the podcast.
Let's get back to Blair Witch. The story really begins at the Sundance Film Festival at the beginning of that year. So this is from a January 25th, 1999 edition of the LA Times. I'm going to read quite a bit of this because I think
Okay.
it's an interesting little relic of the past. So the LA Times says the following: the scariest movie of the 1999 Sundance Film Festival, a mock documentary about three supposed student filmmakers chasing witches in the haunted Maryland woods, debuted here to a packed house just after midnight Sunday, setting off an all-night negotiation and turning a pair of no-name writer-directors into stars. Just before the sun rose over the ski slopes, Artisan Entertainment made the first buy of the festival, paying between $1 million and $2 million for worldwide rights to the Blair Witch Project, a raw, low-budget thriller that some were calling the movie equivalent of garage band rock. It's basically like a home movie of three kids going into hell, said Blair Witch co-writer and co-director Eduardo Sanchez. Working through the night, Artisan, which made what many consider the best buy of last year's festival, Darren Aronofsky's Pi, shut out Fine Line Cinema and Miramax, among others, that had planned to begin initial discussions at daybreak. Meanwhile, the filmmakers, five Florida-based horror nuts aged 27 to 35, who just weeks ago had their water shut off for lack of payment, were suddenly the talk of the town. With a first-look arrangement for future projects with Artisan, which also secured a deal for a Blair Witch sequel, the five friends watched their fortunes change literally overnight. So that's like the great rags to riches story that was one of the sort of genesis stories of the Blair Witch Project, where people were like, oh, there's this movie that came out at Sundance and everybody had this bidding war over it, and it's like this new thing you've never seen before. And like when we talk about the organic buzz, like that's kind of where it starts, long before the really elaborate ad campaign took over. But there you go. So it really does begin in January that this movie sort of was on the radar of a lot of people.
And we're in May, right?
Mm-mm. We're in July.
July, okay. We're in
Yeah.
May in real life, though, that's what I was asking. That's
We are
I totally knew
yes.
when this movie actually came out.
It is currently May. Yeah, 2022. Um, Artisan, interesting. It was an interesting little company that sort of came into existence, did a lot of really big things in a couple of years in the late 90s, and then kind of faded into obscurity. It only existed as Artisan from 1998 through 2005, but 1999 was pretty much inarguably its best year, featuring Blair Witch in addition to four other films that we will eventually cover here. The Buena Vista Social Club, Ghost Dog: The Way of the Samurai, Stir of Echoes, and The Limey, which I know is a favorite of yours.
I've seen 2 of those. Can you guess which 2? You know one of them for sure.
I'm gonna guess it's Ghost Dog.
Yeah, because of our friend Brian Scully was just like, "This is a good movie." I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah, it is a good movie. You will very much like Buena Vista Social Club, and I'm really interested to see what you say about Stir of Echoes, because I think it's good. I think it's a good movie, and I think it's held up pretty well.
Okay.
But we will. Well, that's quite a ways off. But I'm excited to talk about that with you. So the 7 months between its debut at Sundance and its wide release in theaters became as much a part of the movie as the movie itself, featuring an unprecedented marketing campaign that included a website with fake news clippings and background data on the Blair Witch lore, and a Sci-Fi Channel documentary about Blair's history that acted as a kind of a prequel to the film. It was in a lot of ways the ultimate buzz film, as I said, but one that people were desperate to see in large part as a payoff to the marketing campaign that had led up to it, but it was also well received by critics. So Blair Witch has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 86%, and an 81% Metacritic score, which gives it Metacritic's must-see seal of approval, which is a big deal. You see the words like imaginative and inventive that often show up in the assessments of the films of the film and critics' reviews. In the New York Times, Elvis Mitchell led off his review by saying, quote, "Like a cabin built entirely out of soda cans, the Blair Witch Project is a nifty example of how to make something out of nothing. Nothing but imagination and a game plan so enterprising, it should elevate its creators to pin-up status at film schools everywhere." The less generous reviews point to the film resting too much on gimmickry and not enough on story building, like Kevin Thomas in the Los Angeles Times, who called it, quote, "a clever, entertaining stunt, no more, no less." Still, most critics acknowledged this inherent flaw while praising the film all the same, like Entertainment Weekly's Lisa Schwartzbaum, who said, quote, "As a horror picture, Blair Witch may not be much more than a cheeky game, a novelty with the cool, blurry look of an avant-garde artifact. But as a manifestation of multimedia synergy, it's pretty spooky." All right, here's something that I'm interested in, though, Joey, and I think this is something that we're going to talk about, again, more sort of why when we talk to our guest today. Rotten Tomatoes audience score for Blair Witch Project. Again, its critic score is 86%.
Oh, I don't even know where I would guess what this would be. I could see it being anywhere between like 50 and 100.
Okay, it is between 50 and 100. Okay, I'm gonna now force you into this. Is it on the lower end of the 50 to 100 scale, below 75?
So yes. I think it's in the I think if I had to pick a range, I would say between 70 and 75. That's just where that's where my bullseye dart is going.
That's what I would have guessed too. It has an audience score of 56%.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of that is retroactively people being like, I don't like found footage, and this caused it all.
So this is that's what interests me. Because for people who don't know, in general, the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is generally higher than the critic score, right? Like 9 times out of 10.
Well, unless it's like a real art house film, not an art house film, but like there's sometimes like a movie you're like, oh, I get like critics are gonna like that, but the audience is gonna hate that, right? It's like those kind of things. But yes, generally, especially for like summer movies and summer blockbustery kind of movie, even this isn't a blockbuster, but like it sort of has like flavors of that.
Right.
Yes, almost always. And then sometimes they're close, but like it's almost people who just like movies generally like things more than people who get paid to like movies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this, I mean, to me, what's so weird about this, again, is as you say, like, this is not, it's not like blue or red or white. Like, it's not one of those where the critics are going to be gaga about it, and you might see the audience being like, I don't understand French art house films or whatever. But
are those movies this year or no? No, white and blue were 94. 93, 94. No, they were all 93 to 94.
Okay, so yeah, but I don't know why those came to mind. But that just it's sort of
no, but you're right. You're right.
It's an example of like when you might expect an audience score to be a little bit lower, not like massively lower. I mean, I don't think an audience would be like, ugh, red, fuck that. You know what I mean? It's very weird that you have this disparity, and so it kind of begs the question, like, is Blair Witch a movie that is so of its time and needed to be appreciated like within that very specific context in order to work really as a movie at all? And is that what's responsible for all of this? So we're going to pose that question to our guest today. So Joey, who is today's guest?
Our guest today is writer, researcher, podcaster, and host of the podcast American Hysteria and Blair Witch Project superfan, Chelsey Weber-Smith.
We're going to take a break, and we will be back in a moment with Chelsey Weber-Smith. Hello, Chelsey. It's so nice to have you. How are you?
I'm recovering from COVID, so I will sound a little bit stuffy, but otherwise, I am very happy to be here to talk about one of my all-time favorite movies. So thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. I immediately thought of you when we came up with the idea for this podcast, for this particular movie, because I know how much you love it, and also because you've done research on this particular
Oh
movie
yeah.
that I can't be bothered to do. So we're gonna rely on you for a bunch of insider knowledge. Um, Before we do that, you host a podcast.
That's right.
It's called American Hysteria,
This is true.
if I got the title right. You want to
Ever
tell
heard of
people
it?
what that's all about?
Sure, yeah. Our show covers American fantastical thinking, and sometimes it's moral panics or urban legends or conspiracy theories or kind of any abnormal sort of ideologies. Abnormal, who knows what that means? But departing from what we consider um, reality that we share as a collective group of people. And so yeah, we it's a scripted show, so it's a lot of me talking and trying to just bring some of my own passion to some of the strangest stories in our history and figure out why we fear the wrong things and believe in wild stuff.
Which we do.
We sure do. And the Blair Witch Project kind of falls into it, being such a prolific hoax as it was. So,
Right. Right. Yeah, it really does. Like a lot of this movie, I mentioned in our very first episode that we recorded, that you know the project word here is really kind of uh, the key word, right?
mhm.
Because this is a movie that is so much, in some ways, like less than a movie and so much more than a movie at the same time, right? Like we're almost the movie part of the movie is kind of secondary to everything else about it, which is a really cool, kind of fascinating and groundbreaking experiment in like what a movie can be and like what you can do with it.
Absolutely. It's so much more than just, I mean, it's a multimedia project, as you said,
Right.
that utilized everything from the media to college campuses, message boards. You know, this is a movie that could have only happened in the late 90s before the internet became closer to what we know today.
When did you first see Blair Witch? In what context? And what was the initial viewing experience of it like for you?
I saw it probably as soon as it came on home video. So I was 11 in 99. So I would say I was 11 when I saw it. My parents went without me and I was very upset. They went into the theater on a date and that was their excuse for not taking me because we were always a horror movie family, so it wasn't the content, it was the situation that left me out. So because at that point I had seen the trailer and I remember seeing the trailer better even than I remember seeing the movie, and that
Yeah.
was just that thought of like there, because it wasn't like Texas Chainsaw where you're like, I know this is fake, like this is you, there was a question, especially when you're in your like magical thinking years of like, is there a better age than 11 to like believe in anything? So like it was definitely the trailer that made me think, and I was already a true crime person. So I was like always watching true crime shows, and my first thought was like, there's no way this is legal. And but you know, I immediately went on the website and really, I remember, I believe I saw first the because it was on TV, the documentary that they made to accompany the documentary. So the documentary about the documentary that fleshed out all of the lore, and that's its own thing. I'm sure we'll talk about, but
Mhm.
yeah, and I think just seeing it, I thought it was so scary and so much fun. And I showed everybody, and I started making the Blair Witch stick figures. That was something I really enjoyed doing, and like hanging them in weird places as a prank. So I was a very weird kid. So yeah, it was more, again, like it wasn't even just the movie, it was all of the mystique that surrounded it that I couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah, and there's something about those, like, I think I'm glad you brought up the stick figures, because that's one of those things that is so, like, it's so demonstrative of, like, what the movie is, like, what's so brilliant about it, because it's so simple and so easy to reproduce and, like, so kind of, like, on its own kind of benign, right? But it also is, like, incredibly weird and haunting and terrifying at the same time. So it's like it's this, like, low budget scare tactic that, you know, just sort of captures the imagination, which is exactly sort of what the whole ethic of the Blair Witch Project is, as kind of a movie and a project, right? As a multimedia project.
Absolutely.
Joey, you were also 11, as we have
Aw.
reiterated many times on the show. What was your first Blair Witch experience?
Yeah, I was going to say, I listened to, at your suggestion, I listened to Chelsey's episode about the Blair Witch, so I knew her history, and I was like, oh, I've lost the edge that I'm like, I can't play the young card anymore because our guest is the same age, but I can now play the sheltered card, where I was absolutely not allowed to watch this for, I don't know how long. I watched this in college, like most of these other movies that we're going to be covering on this podcast, and I don't know what the date was, but I watched in a row for the first time the movie that Chelsey just mentioned, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then Carrie, and then Blair Witch. So clearly I was going through something that week in some summer in college.
Something great.
Yeah. And then Scream a couple days later, and then Who Can Kill a Child, which is a crazy movie, and then Pieces. So, like, I was
sorry, wait, what was the last one?
Who Can Kill a Child?
What the hell? I have no idea what that is.
So it's a movie.
Chelsey doesn't know what it is. It is obscure.
So it's a movie. In between, I watched The Last American Virgin because I was on like an Eli Roth kick, and I watched this like interview on YouTube where he's like, "Here's my 5 favorite movies that nobody knows about." And so one was Last American Virgin, one was Who Can Kill a Child. It's basically this couple goes on vacation to this island somewhere, and there's no adults around, and it's just a bunch of kids. And it quickly becomes clear that like these kids have killed all the adults. And so the whole like question of the movie is like, if you had to survive, could you kill a child? So, yeah, it kind of rules.
That's wild.
So I watched that week, or the week after as well. So I saw it in college. I feel like it's the kind of thing where, and we were talking about this a little bit with Star Wars, where I'm in a weird age where like I feel like if I was a little bit older, I would have been like so into this because I love like what would become like alternate reality games, like when Cloverfield was coming out. Like I remember being into that, and just like all those kind of like, I liked falling down the rabbit hole, but I was not online when I was 11. My parents were not like letting me watch horror movies, and so I just kind of missed this altogether. And I'm bummed because like by the time I was able to see it, like I knew, not the details of it, but I knew that it wasn't real. And I feel like at any point, if you're able to see this movie in any way, thinking even like 1% that it might have been real, I think that's magical, right? But like, by the time I saw it, I'm like, oh no, like that's, it's, I know it's just a movie, and like it's, it's a good movie that I like, but it's also I didn't have that experience, and I don't know. I think like what Chelsey said before, like I don't think that this kind of thing could be done today. Like I think going back, I don't know if either of you ever seen Cannibal Holocaust. Do either of you know that? Have you seen that?
I've actually just watched that for the very first time in preparation for an episode we're doing. So yes, I have seen Cannibal Holocaust.
John, have you seen Cannibal Holocaust?
I would not be able to get through 8 minutes of that movie.
Do you know what it's about or no?
Yes.
So it's basically,
I did not know.
It's kind of like the same thing as this in a way, right? Like this crew goes down to South America, and then they go missing, and then they find the footage. But in that movie, like the aftermath, like, and it's something that we'll talk about here, the director like refused to admit that it was a movie. He's like, no, these people were killed. And, like he went to prison, I believe, because he refused to say no, they're fine. And so like they went to court to like prove, and it was just like this, it's this crazy, and like that's from 1980, so that's like way pre-internet, right? So like 99, you're able to like get like weird stuff, like this is, I don't know, like there's something magical about, and like in a weird kind of messed up way where it's just like, oh, these kids might have died, and like we're watching them on TV. It's so I don't know, it's special, and I saw it too late, and I'm bummed that I didn't get to see this. I didn't get to experience it the way that it, like, quote unquote should have been seen, I think.
Yeah.
And Cannibal Holocaust too, like if you watch it near to when you watch the Blair Witch Project, there's like absolute homages in Blair Witch. Like that was definitely their main inspiration, because there were sort of precautions taken to, as they did with Blair Witch, like making their IMDb page say that they were missing, like these different things. That was taken, I think, from Cannibal Holocaust, or at least movies around that time.
And the other thing I want to say, that I think one thing, like, I think it's both easy and difficult to compare the two movies, but I think the one thing that Cannibal Holocaust definitely has over Blair Witch, because it's more of like a cinematic experience, is the score is outstanding and the theme is amazing. And I just want to give props to Euphoria for using the Cannibal Holocaust theme on season 2 in the perfect needle drop moment. I was just like, I cannot believe like 1% of 1% of their audience has probably seen Cannibal Holocaust. And I was just like, this is a moment made for me. So if you like Blair Witch, I would recommend see Cannibal Holocaust if you can get through it.
If you dare, like
if you dare,
the hardest of warnings, because they also, that is much closer to what we think of as like a hoax snuff film. Definitely, because as much as the Blair Witch, it's whatever. We can move on from Cannibal Holocaust.
All right, this is now 1980, the podcast, and we're talking exclusively about Cannibal Holocaust.
We've been working on our snuff film series, so I'm like so deep in all these snuff film hoaxes. It's so wild. It's going to be good.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Blair Witch Project.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yep. 1999. So I was 19 when this came out. And it's funny, like what you were saying about the whole kind of having any kind of doubt that it was real, right? I remember very much by the time I went to go see the movie in the theater, I saw it like the opening Friday. I knew everything about how it wasn't real. I watched the Sci-Fi Channel special. I was a big like Premiere magazine reader, so I read about like the movie appearing in film festivals and interviews with the directors, and I knew the ins and outs of how they did it and what they did and why. But there's something there was an element of the marketing of this movie that's such a big part of it, that even though they were very upfront about this being fake, there were elements of it that allowed you to like somehow switch that off and pretend that it wasn't, and just like give into that tiny hint of doubt, right? That like this actually was really happening.
Yeah.
The no-name actors, right? The sort of, the aesthetic of it, obviously. The way that the Sci-Fi Channel documentary just fit perfectly in with every other documentary about supposedly real paranormal events and that sort of thing. And so it lived in these like both of these worlds at the same time, so that when you went to go see it, like you knew it wasn't real, but as with all like conspiracy theories, there's that like tiny little 1% chance that it might be, that you're still really kind of enamored by.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what really worked for me. And I saw it, and a bunch of my friends who have a much higher threshold for horror than I do were like, whatever. And I'm like, I'm not going camping ever. I know you guys like to camp, but like that's not happening now. So that was great and a thrilling experience, but like I want to go inside with as many lights as possible forever. And yeah, it was a really remarkable experience. And I remember also like buying it on VHS. And I don't think I ever watched it on VHS, because I was like,
I feel like that's the way to watch it, though.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like,
it is, but everybody I knew had already seen it, and so like it's not really rewatchable.
Like I think I don't want to put words in your mouth, but Chelsey, I think you said something along the lines of like this couldn't really happen today, like it had to be made in the 90s. But I feel like with the way that movies get distributed, you could do something like it wouldn't be in theaters, but like there could be like a viral video. I'm sure that there has been, that I'm just not thinking of, that like goes around YouTube or something that's like this, that people are like, is this real? And then like I feel like the distribution of that, like, it wouldn't be a VHS tape, but I feel like the underground kind of bootleg of it all, it would have made it feel more authentic and real. Like, oh, this is a copy of this thing that, my friend got or whatever. And like, I don't know how long you could like keep that lie going, but I feel like that could be doable back then or today. It just, it wouldn't make money, which I guess is kind of the issue, right?
Right. And you know what it makes me think of? Do you guys know or remember the footage of the man who allegedly got lost in the Paris catacombs? It came out like 10 years ago.
No, I don't think so.
And that was part of a documentary on another, I don't know what it was, Discovery maybe. Like, and the documentary itself seems a little fake about this footage, but the footage is so scary. I mean, it's just in the catacombs, literally like someone getting more and more frantic alone, and then they drop the camera and they're running, and
Oh my god.
and I think that's what's so good about Blair Witch too, is like you don't see the monster in this footage. And I think that's part
Yeah.
of why it can feel so real, is because most of what's happening is happening completely off camera, even sound wise. It's like there's a sense of like that this could be real because there are no monsters.
And I think that's what's really effective about this. And this is something that we talked about in an episode we recorded that's not out yet. Similarly, so there's a collective of editors online that used to go by Racer Trash, and they did a version of this movie, and they cut together like it's more experimental than most of the other things they've done. But what this captures and what they do in one segment is like there's very few movies that I think are as effective as Blair Witch at demonstrating terror in a way that like is almost like objectively not scary. Like there's nothing to be scared about, but the way that it builds the world around, it feels like the walls are closing in on you. And there is a segment at the end of this thing, that this recut of Blair Witch, where they're just like there's a handful of different movies that are cut together in a way that like makes you feel uneasy in a way that like no other movie is able to do. And so I think what Chelsey's saying is so like that's why this works, right? Like if you saw The Witch, I think it would be dumb.
It would ruin it.
And I think the fact that there is no witch, that everything is in your mind, and that so few other movies are as effective at being able to do anything that's even remotely approaching this, is remarkable. And that I think is why it works as well today as it did then. As long as you're willing to buy into it. Either it's not going to work for you, it's going to work for you. But like, if you're willing to like give it the benefit of the doubt, I think because it's so not basic, but like simple, right?
And
like
I think it doesn't explain itself. And that's like my favorite part, is that like, there are points at which the characters say, oh my God, I think this is like rednecks in the woods, or, or it's this phantom of this witch, or potentially there's like a child murderer. There's just different possibilities of what it could be. So even though you don't see the monster, you see like remnants of these weird parts of the monster, like what they're leaving behind, like these breadcrumbs. But it allows you to be like, put one foot in reality and be like, maybe there are like weird people in the woods. Maybe there is like some kind of witch in the woods that's a being that we can comprehend, or maybe it is paranormal. And that kind of lets it be more real, because you have to decide whether it's like of this world or not.
And that's part of what I think is kind of like the immersive element of it, which is sort of what I was alluding to earlier, which is like nobody went in to see, well, a few people did. Like that probably is true, that some people were like, well, what's this movie? And I just assumed it was a documentary. And I'm sure there's a few people who are still in the dark about it, whatever. But, again, they went out of their way to be like, here's what it is. They, like Heather Donahue was like on talk shows being like, I'm not dead, right? Before it came out, promoting it and that sort of thing. But the sort of, as you guys sort of allude to, the kind of central mystery that the characters are enduring, everything is kind of explainable, right? Like everything is like, oh, it's just punk kids, playing a prank or whatever, or rednecks, or like some serial killer on the loose or something, that like nothing needs to invoke the supernatural. But then in the totality of it, it leaves just enough of that sort of like sense of dread and supernatural and mystery that sort of drives the movie. Like in the same way that the characters are doubting what's happening to them, right? That tiny bit of doubt as you're watching it of like, well, is it real? Keeps creeping back in. And it's really cool to have that kind of, to have built that kind of connection with the protagonists of the movie, to make it really kind of immersive and sort of, in your face.
Yeah, for sure.
Because there, I guess there's a couple different layers here, right? There's like and I think, and we can maybe rehash it here, maybe we should, but like what Chelsey describes on her episode about like the improvisational nature of what these actors went through and not really knowing what they were going to find as they were sort of guided remotely through the woods. But there's like what the characters are going through, what the actors are going through, and what the actors like pretending to go through as the characters, and then what the audience, like there's just all these like parallels, I think, between like what you're seeing on screen, and especially for like a horror baby like you, John, like, and I say that so lovingly, like you're more likely to be freaked out because like I think their genuine dread comes across.
Yeah.
And it, just it's the not knowing. It's what your brain does to like, it's not like what's scary. It's just, I think it's the uneasiness. I think it's the like not really knowing if you're safe or if you're not safe. Cause like, I think for most of this movie, I think they're kind of overreacting. Like I get that they're worried, but like they're in the woods. There doesn't really seem to be like a threat around. It's like their minds that are making it worse. So like they're hunting this thing that may or may not be real, and they're freaked out about that. But like, there's nothing that they ever really encounter for most of the movie until they start seeing the piles of rocks and the sticks and whatever, that like gives them any indication that they're in any kind of danger. Like they might as well just be like in the woods camping, right? But like it's just the acute, like the slow burn of like, should I be worried? I might be worried. Like, am I worried? Should I be worried? I don't know if I should be worried. Like I'm freaking myself out, right? Like it's one of those kind of, so
yeah.
it just
and it starts
that way.
with just being lost, right? And realizing that you're lost, which I think I'm really interested in lost in the wilderness stories, like especially like the Donner Party and these ways that like the unimaginable terror of like slowly realizing that you're lost in the wilderness. And then, that kind of is what I think creates the dis-ease that you're talking about, that then allows like the paranormal stuff to come on kind of slowly and like insidiously.
So Chelsey, talk to us about the way that this movie kind of harnesses the existing kind of underlying hysterias, for lack of a better word, and kind of folklore and anxieties that this movie kind of creates a kind of a template for, right? Like it sort of takes all these ingredients that already existed in our culture and then kind of creates something as a piece of art. Like, what do you see? Like, what do you think that they kind of are working from, and what do they sort of kind of add into that formula that you would point to?
Well, I mean, there's definitely witch trial lore in there. There's definitely kind of like stolen children, the child murderer, all of those typical archetypes that we see from American panics and panics all over the world. But what I think I find the most interesting in terms of like what I do in the work that I do is that they created like their own urban legend, like a very original piece of folklore that pulled definitely from a lot of historical stuff, but also really like they just made up this entire legend around this thing called the Blair Witch and all of the different ways that it has appeared throughout time. Like, for example, like I mentioned, the child murderer who is potentially possessed by this force, or else the story of a bunch of people who were killed ritualistically at Coffin Rock, right? Or seeing like a white hand rise out of a river and pull a child down beneath the stones of the river. Like just this like beautiful, like esoteric, weird imagery that they definitely pulled from other sources, but I think it's just really a testament to what they were able to do because like you mentioned, the sci-fi documentary really fleshes that out, and so did the website. You could go on the website and you could find testimonials of people who live in the town. You could find all of these different things on message boards that were planted by the crew, and you could find just little breadcrumbs that they were dropping that were fleshing out this urban legend. And they used a real town, they used these things that made it seem so real and on the edge of reality, like urban legends are. So there's satanic panic, of course, but I think one of the things I respect so much about this movie is that they didn't play into the satanic panic as much as they
Right.
easily could have in 1999. I mean, that's, the trench coat mafia year. That's like Marilyn Manson and all of this like very, very satanic related stuff that kind of was returning in its new late 90s form. And I think it could have been so easy for them to go that route, but instead they went a very uh they like had enough of that, enough ritual stuff, and they were going to actually add a bunch of satanic symbols in the house at the end, where you see all the handprints of all the children, which by the way were made by all of the children of the crew, which is so adorable. They all got to go and make the house all scary together. But yeah, they were going to do that, and for whatever reason they didn't, and that would have changed it. If you just saw a bunch of pentagrams and candles, it would have been really trite, and instead they just went this really original route, and I love it because I get really stressed out whenever I see satanic cult content, because I'm like, I'm not at work, and I just I hate it. I can't watch horror movies like that. Yeah.
I have a simple question that I meant to look up and I didn't look up. When was this filmed? Because it quote unquote takes place in 1994, right? Like they're like in
Yeah.
1994, they're filming it, but like was it it was shot very, very quickly, right? Like over a day or two. Is that right? Like mostly. So like, do you know like what was it filmed in 99? I'm just wondering about like when you bring up the themes of that year and like what happened in culture. Like I wonder what the actual time frame of the production was, and if you know that offhand, or if not, I could look it up while I meant to, because I'm wondering, because it feels both 99 and also 94 in a way that like is unique, and I don't know where it actually like exists time wise.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, I'm looking it up. I didn't know, but it is 97, and it took 8 days. So,
Okay.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think any part of the 90s is definitely a satanic panic year option for content. But
sure.
yeah, it's definitely like 97. I mean, what do you guys think? What was going on in 97?
Oh boy.
I was graduating from high school.
I was 8. No, I was
Oklahoma
9.
City? No, that was a
This
little
is
earlier.
this is you. Yeah, we were 11.
Yeah, John, we're it's story time. Please, John, Uncle John, please tell us what 1997 was like.
I don't think a lot. I don't not a ton.
When did Princess Diana die? Was that 97 or was that before?
That was 97. Yeah.
Yeah.
97. Yeah.
Right.
And John Denver. So yeah. But yeah, no, it was a fairly decently quiet year as far as I remember for like international events, I guess.
Mhm.
Sure.
But, yeah, it's funny actually. What you say about the satanic panic stuff, I think that's really interesting. There's also a deep irony about that when it comes to the first sequel, but we'll talk about that in a moment. We'll talk about the other Blair Witch movies.
Yes.
and one's forthcoming. But question for you: do you think that without the website and sci-fi stuff and the way that they very meticulously kind of went about promoting the movie as both like real and fake at the same time, it's a really interesting way, like on its own, if people had just been like, here's this movie, and just people went to go see it in a theater, is it not effective? Is it more effective? Like, what role do you think, like how important is the supporting material and the world building and the narrative building and the folklore building beforehand to the experience of the movie? And does the movie just work like as its own thing without all of that? It might be like a impossible to answer question, because I might be trying to like proving a negative, because like you can't go back and undo it that way. But what's your sense?
Well, here's what I'll say. I think that all the supporting stuff is what made it what it was, and it would have been a much more or much less memorable thing. But at the same time, I think that it stands on its own, especially because, and we haven't even talked about the way that it was filmed. It was filmed in such a way that the terror, which we kind of talked about, the terror that we're seeing is at least like 50 to 75% real. And this is because the process was that, for anyone who doesn't know, the actors were just kind of given a bunch of camera equipment and a crash course in how to use it. So there's like a realistic amateurness to it, and
Right.
also that they were not given any real formal script. What would happen is they would get GPS coordinates and they would hike to those coordinates. So they were really hiking. They were really out in the middle of nowhere, and they would get to these GPS coordinates and they would have instructions, like very basic plot instructions, like you can't find the map. You think Heather was the last one that had it. And then it was like, go for it. And then the crew was following them a little bit behind, and each night they were actually yelling and screaming, and they were actually screwing with their stuff, and they were leaving these dolls that they made out in the woods, and all these different they left these actual human teeth, yes, real human teeth, in front of the tent, right? So it's like these things were really happening, and I think it's such a bummer. I mean, it's not a bummer because this is also a cultural phenomenon, but Scary Movie so quickly made a joke of Heather Donahue's character and
Yeah.
the snot pouring out of her nose when she's crying and apologizing to her mom and Josh's mom and Mike's mom, and it just really became this thing that was a big joke because it's like, oh, that woman has snot running down her face, and she looks so bad, instead of, wow, that's actually very incredible acting. Like the
Yeah.
acting in this movie, it's so funny because it got so many Raspberry Awards, and it was just kind of seen as not good acting, where that's kind of impossible because it's literally not acting for a good chunk of it. But I think in that way, that the terror and the story itself and the ambiguous nature of the legend that it presents, and the choppy way that you just get these tiny pieces of this larger story, that you never get to fit together. There's something about that that's just really good storytelling for horror. And so I would have still loved it, but there's no way that it would be what we think of today.
Yeah, and like all that stuff. First of all, we can talk about the ethics of doing that.
Oh God, yeah.
And am I right? Like, do I remember that the actors were kind of pissed? I mean, like they did one or two of them later kind of resent the whole experience and kind of call it out. I can't remember. Like, I might be making that up.
Yeah,
but...
I think it was really stressful. Like people would call their homes and like wish their parents like condolences on their dead kids, and it just was really, everybody gets so weird about everything. So people were like, I'm going to look up the phone number.
It's amazing how bad dumb people can make things sometimes, right?
Yes.
Like, it's a movie.
What are you doing? Why do you think anyone wants to hear from you, too? Why do you think the parents want to hear from you?
It's pretty well known by now that it's a movie. So let's just, not call the parents.
But I know Heather, like, pieced the fuck out of everything and went and got herself a weed farm and wrote a little memoir about her weed farm. So, that's a nice relaxing thing to do.
And then one of them married Alison Pill.
Yeah,
so
which I didn't know until recently.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
So that's wild. And then there's the third one who I don't know what became of him, but...
Well, if you want to talk about, I mean, just to go back to Cannibal Holocaust for 1 second.
I'm listening.
You're here for it. So the ethics of that, I mean, is so much worse because actually the lead actor was told, hey, we're going to film this movie in South America. We're going to fly you down to star in it. And he was like, what's the role? And they were like, don't worry about it. It's totally fine. And he was like, okay, you're not going to tell me what it is. And they like did not tell him until he was on location. And then, I mean, the things that happen in this movie, it is, up to others to seek that out. But yeah, so there is this trend of definitely bordering on abusive treatment. I mean, I don't even know if it's bordering on it, because what is consent when you don't really know what's going to happen in the movie? But
Right.
yeah. So
And like, what's remarkable about that kind of, I mean, it's a different era for sure, but like in almost every way, it's less successful. Like Blair Witch not only is beloved and was financially successful, but like also literally created a genre, or at least if not created the found footage genre, but like cemented it as a thing that we are going to be either saddled with or get to see for a long time, right? Like it was successful in like every metric. And like Cannibal Holocaust is wild, but it's just like a cult movie. Like all of these like extreme measures they took didn't really work. Like it's not
No.
like people are like, oh, that financially and commercially and critically successful film Cannibal Holocaust, right? Like it's just like it's an oddity almost.
It's just a banned movie. It's just the most banned. And that's what he did, you know? So I guess he lives in infamy.
And
Or
there's
the
also
movie
like the
does,
whole
yeah.
like actual like abuse against animals and stuff like that in that movie
Oh,
that like
yeah.
is real and like
Horror.
is, you know, legitimate reasons to boycott that. Also, like I saw that at the Draft House, like not the first time, but I saw that at the Draft House in Austin at a feast where they pair the movie with food, and they had like turtle soup and stuff with it. So like it was
Oh
a whole
my
thing.
God.
It
Ew.
was like a whole. It was
Nope.
wonderful.
No.
I'm gonna see if I can find the menu, and I will talk about that because this is
Dude, I
also a
like
Cannibal
horror,
Holocaust episode.
but no. I could go. I definitely will never see Cannibal Holocaust again, and wouldn't probably have seen it if it weren't for research. But I did a lot of 10 seconds forward that you can do, you know, where you kind of skip through things
Oh,
really
sure.
fast. But yeah, it's
Oh, I saw that on Valentine's Day in 2015. That's right.
That's nice. That's nice.
Yeah. I can't find the menu, but I have the.
Oh my God.
Yeah, super cool.
Feel free to
Let's
cut
talk-
whatever Cannibal Holocaust
No.
content you want to.
Cut all the Blair Witch stuff. This is now just about Cannibal Holocaust.
Let's talk about Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2, released 1 year after the Blair Witch Project. Chelsey, have you seen it?
Yes, I actually can speak more to this than you would expect because before I had American Hysteria, I did a different show that was about sort of a meta look at true crime content through talking to people who make it. And Joe Berlinger, who's the director of Book of Shadows, also is the documentarian behind Paradise Lost, the 3 documentaries about the West Memphis 3, who were falsely imprisoned for an apparent alleged satanic ritual that happened in the 90s.
Right.
And that ended up with 3 children dead. So it was a long, you know, decade and a half, maybe even 20 years of the satanic panic, one of the worst iterations of what that meant, and the process of getting those teenagers at the time in their 30s, maybe by the end of it,
Yeah.
maybe just their late 20s, but
Yeah.
you know, by the end it was they were able to get them out. So he came to Book of Shadows, which is definitely a much more satanic panic version, meta, and I haven't watched it in a long time, so correct me if you've watched it recently, but the plot, which I love, and I don't think it's, I mean, people say it's a really bad movie, but I think it's pretty fun, and I enjoy it because it's, you know, it's meta, it's like kind of the Scream version of Blair Witch, in that, you know, people are going to go on a tour of the woods because they're fans of the Blair Witch, and then they meet their fate. Much like, I wonder if the Titanic that they have apparently been making for its next voyage will just sink. We'll see. Do you know what I'm talking about? I keep thinking that, just like, don't go on that Titanic, man.
Oh, never.
Don't
No.
do it.
What a terrible idea. Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
want to go on it, but just not the first time. But anyway,
It'll sink on the one that you're on. Like,
Yes.
that's how it works.
I feel
Right,
like you got to go
yeah,
on the
perfect.
first one or never. Like you can't. No half measures, Walter. Like you got to go on the first one and then
That's
just hope for the
true.
best.
I wonder if they have not enough lifeboats, not enough by half. But, anyway, it is fun, and when I spoke to Joe Berlinger, he did not like how it turned out because he didn't have final cut, which is a woe of the industry. And but he had a really interesting, he didn't really like talking about it, because I was like, we talked about all of his serious work, and then I was like, but what about Book of Shadows? And he was like, I don't want to talk about Book of Shadows. But he definitely said something about feeling like the original Blair Witch was partially responsible for what would become fake news as we say it today. And I thought that was harsh, but it was it is I mean, I don't find that to be true at all, because the history of media hoaxes is as old as America itself. So
sure,
I don't think that's particularly true. But I think what is really interesting is the satanic imagery, ritual metal type vibe of Blair Witch 2. Probably a lot of it came from the director's own experience fighting against actual false accusations of the satanic panic.
Yeah, that's why when you were talking in the original about them sort of avoiding the pitfalls of satanic panic imagery and lore, the first thing I thought of was like, and then in the sequel, they hire a very famous documentarian to not make a documentary style sequel that's all about like the satanic panic, and he's famous for making a documentary about the satanic panic. And it's like, how, like, what a weird upside down way of, I mean, it's so bizarre. Like, just those facts on themselves is a super bizarre thing to say, right?
Yeah.
As a, like, how are we going to follow this up?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I mean, one of those would be fine. Just be like, make a straight sequel movie that's kind of meta and is sort of not a documentary style and is just a teen horror, whatever. You can do that. But like, why is Joe Berlinger there? And it's still something I've never quite understood. Like, whose idea was it to be like, this guy should direct this movie that is not at all in his wheelhouse and is nothing like the original movie? I can't get my head around. Do you know why he was hired?
I don't. I might have known at some point, but I don't remember now. But yeah, it was a strange choice. But then he went on to make the movie that I never remember the name of, the one that's like extremely horrible and wickedly vile or whatever about.
Oh, the Zac Efron movie.
Yeah, the Zac Efron Ted Bundy piece. So
go check out Zack Attack for more information on that. We covered that movie over there.
Oh,
he's a pretty good Ted Bundy, I think.
Yes, I think he did good. I agree.
Was there another sequel between Book of Shadows and the 2016 Blair Witch, or no?
No.
Because when that movie came out, so I love Simon Barrett and Adam Wingard. They made two of my favorite movies of all time. They made The Guest and You're Next. And I was like, I am all in for anything they do. And they had announced this movie that they're making this movie like called like The Woods or something. I'm like, this is
called The Woods.
This is cool.
Yeah, yes,
right.
Yes.
And then it was like a Comic-Con. They're like, just kidding, it's called Blair Witch, and you get to see it right now. And I'm like, that's kind of a bummer. Like, and not because of any, resentment or affinity or whatever to the Blair Witch, but I'm like, I would rather see them do like a unique original thing than like another. And I remember people hated that movie.
Yeah.
And I liked it, and I watched it and I liked it, and I like them and I think it's good, but I was just like, I don't know. And I really do wonder if like how much of because I think it's to some extent, but how much of the resentment was because it was a sequel or a reboot or whatever you want to think about to the Blair Witch Project. Like if it was its own thing, I don't know that there would have been the backlash that there was. I don't know. Like I'm fascinated by that whole like what that became and like the sort of unique marketing campaign around that movie too.
Wasn't it supposed to be a documentary about it, or like a revelation of more of the footage or something? Because I remember being really excited about it in a way that was like really different than it being another Blair Witch, right? Like it was supposed to be, I don't know. Because then, and then it was suddenly just a Blair Witch, I guess, sequel. Sequel. And then I was just like, they gotta have a guest appearance. I just wanted that guest appearance so bad, even if it was just a flash. But no one wanted to do it. So I don't know. I don't remember it that well. I saw it one time and I'm a purist, I guess, because I was I didn't hate it or anything. I just kind of was like, okay, yeah, that was
And I
like
think
a teen movie. It was
yeah,
fun.
and that's where I have the benefit of, like, not having the affinity toward the first movie because I could kind of watch it, like,
Yeah.
objectively, but I haven't listened to it, but they are sort of known for having, like, really, really good audio commentaries, and I believe that the audio
Hmm.
commentary for that is, like, particularly good because I think they talk about, like, the backlash they face. And I think that it's worth seeking out because I think they're both very talented. Like Simon Barrett's a great screenwriter, and I think Adam Wingard's a great filmmaker. And Adam Wingard actually involved in the Racer Trash Blair Witch PR project, like that whole he did one of the segments in that. So anyway, he loves the franchise clearly, but like they have this I don't know why they're able to or why they do it, but they're very open and honest on their director's commentaries. And I remember there being like revelations on that one. So, even if you didn't love that movie, I think it's worth seeking out the DVD and listening to the commentary. 'Cause, they're just fascinating dudes who are open in a way that I feel like most filmmakers kind of aren't and are told not to be, sort of, right? So I don't know.
That sounds great. Yeah, and I would totally give it another chance. It did not anger me. You know what I mean? I didn't walk out being like I hated that. Which is good. I'd
High
say for
praise.
horror
High
that's
praise.
good. Yeah.
Did not anger me.
Yeah.
Chelsey Wilbur-Smith. Right on there on the New York Times one-page spread.
Did not anger me.
Was not outwardly pissed off at this movie.
Just inwardly. I hit it very well.
Spinning off of something Joey said, Chelsey, one more thing I want to ask you before we go, which is, so Joey, you referred to this as a franchise, and what it is ultimately
Did I? Is it? I don't know. Okay.
Like you said, it has more than 2 movies, so it's a franchise.
And there's more coming.
Well, this is what I want to talk to you about, right? So this is my question. So what you have is one unique movie that can't be replicated that was, again, part of a whole multimedia project, incredibly elaborate and with a ton of creative investment from everybody involved. And then you have Book of Shadows, and then and then you have 16 years later a weird kind of rebootish attempt at bringing some of that back that nobody really cared about, but I guess didn't make anybody angry. So yeah, we just got word that there is more in the works, that there's some kind of Blair Witch reboot project happening. And I guess what I'd ask you is what should they do with this? Nothing seems to have worked so far to either recapture the magic or to use the lore in a way that's effective and can create another really sort of, notable movie that people are going to be really into. What would you do? How should they go about rebooting this, or what should be next, do you think?
I say prequel. Get back into the lore,
Yeah.
even if it's I would, man, if it was me, I'd do 3 different plot lines, because it's in the lore, it's the time where they're talking about Rustin Parr, the child murderer, and I think that's the 50s or something, and they talk about a woman who was burned at the stake, who is perhaps the origin story of the Blair Witch, and maybe throw something modern in, for the teens, but and for me, I need a party scene in every horror movie. But I would also say bring back Eduardo Sanchez. And what's the name? What's the other person's name? I always
Myrick.
forget.
Daniel
Yes.
Myrick?
Yes. Thank you. And because Eduardo Sanchez, did you guys watch Yellow Jackets?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he directed the finale, actually, of Yellow Jackets.
Oh,
so
okay, cool.
He's out here doing cool shit. And I just think, why not team up with your dudes and work together and just give us I don't like a period piece, but I would like this period piece.
Yeah, because there's plenty to mine, really, from
So
take the
much.
Sci-Fi Channel special and just pick that apart and make those movies. I totally agree with you.
Would you like and I don't know, maybe this is I don't remember enough of the Simon, would you like a meta take on it or no? Because I guess I don't know enough about Book of Shadows other than what you guys just talked about, but I wonder if they go out to dispel it, or they go out to I don't know, but I feel because I think the issue is you can't do the same thing as the first one.
Right.
Right.
You definitely
Because you can't do it better. Even if you don't love the first movie, I think for what it's trying to do, I think it's immensely successful. So you can't do the same thing. So you have to do something different.
Yeah, and I don't think you can do a found footage, right? Again, I just don't think you can.
I don't think so. Yeah, no.
I think so.
It wouldn't make sense.
I agree.
Yeah.
Which I think the 2016 was found footage. Maybe
I think it might have been. I think it might have been found footage. Yeah, and it was Heather's little brother going to find her.
Okay. Yeah. So I wonder.
That's stupid. I hate that.
So I while we were talking, I found there's a 31 things we learned from the Blair Witch commentary that I put in the chat here that we can take a look at. You guys check out later. But it feels like Lionsgate really kind of meddled with what they wanted to do. So it clearly wasn't the movie that they necessarily wanted to make. So I don't know. But I feel like I think you're right, Chelsey. You can't do found footage. You can't do the same thing. You can't really retread. I don't know what you do. I feel like.
Oh, here's an even better meta. Sorry, I just got excited.
No, please.
About the making of it somehow, right? I don't know how that. I didn't think that out too much, but
kind of like a Wes Craven's New Nightmare, but for the Blair Witch Project.
Literally said the next thing I was going to say.
That movie's great.
That's great. We're just on the same
Nightmare's
page.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a great movie. Great movie.
I wonder, So the movie that we're talking about today from 1999 is about the people who find the footage and we're watching the footage. So I feel like if I had any recollection of the 2016 movie or if I had seen Book of Shadows, I would be able to say this with more authority. But what if it's just about the people who find the footage?
Ooh. Which is again a Cannibal Holocaust thing.
Yes, it is Cannibal Holocaust. Because there's also the thing of what I don't necessarily fully understand about this movie is that at certain points, Heather's I think I have enough footage. I'll figure it out. I'll edit it later, whatever. And they're shooting on film or whatever. But we're also kind of led to believe that what we're watching is their unedited footage. It can't be because if there's overlapping dialogue of people talking over other footage and someone assembled this in a way.
I like that.
And I don't know if there's a movie there, but I feel there's something possible about so, okay, in 1995, they find the thing in the burned down building and blah, 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 and they're putting it together. Maybe. I don't know. There's also that Archive 81 show on Netflix this year that kind of got into that. I was just this is such a cool premise. And the show completely whiffed. And I was just but the idea of finding footage, literally finding found footage, right? And doing something with it and compiling it or editing it or telling a story out of it. Maybe there's something there, but I also don't know if there's unless the witch is haunting the editor, which is why would they?
Well,
why would that happen?
What about
Blair Witch for the editor?
Yeah, I don't know.
What about if? Well, what if it's sort of why did they leave out what they left out, and what story would that have told? Kind of a conspiracy type. Maybe there's more to it. These murders could have occurred, but there were powerful shadow groups involved.
There was a cover up.
A cover up. And I mean, something that I think is one of the most beautiful details they wrote is that when they found the footage, it was buried beneath a colonial wall, and it couldn't have gotten there. They were excavating this thing for whatever reason, and it was buried deep under. Oh, well, it's just so good. It's so freaky that it's just so freaky to me. So that finding that would be just these whoever finding VHS tapes, and they're just how did these get here? It's physically impossible.
Maybe, and this is not what you were saying at all, but what you said reminded me, maybe they pull leftovers, John, and they show the actual the original building. It's what became Miracle. They show maybe the witch. I don't know.
I love it. Yeah. I think no matter what, I think what we have concluded here is that the three of us should write this. So
please.
No, I don't think we've proved that at all. I think we have a bunch of half-baked ideas.
They're all awesome.
we either need to get real high and fully flesh them out, or just not do it at all, because I don't think, no offense to any of us, myself mostly, I don't think anything we've said here has been even remotely good. I think they've all they're all like approaching interesting, just like that's terrible. So
well, they're all the start of really good ideas. And maybe
I will agree with that. They're the start of good ideas. Okay.
I mean, we're going to see what they come up with for the next series of films, and we'll see if it's better than what we came up with.
Or if it's anything like this, we'll just sue them.
Yeah.
We'll be like, you listen to the
You heard it
podcast.
here
I think it's pretty
first.
obvious. Yeah. Okay, let's finish up. So, Joey, do you want to ask Chelsey our final questions?
Oh, yeah. So we have 2 questions, and I think the answer to the first one is obvious, but do you have a favorite movie from the year 1999?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, The Blair Witch Project. I would also say Drop Dead Gorgeous.
Cool.
Nice.
Very good answers.
Yeah.
Now, is one of those your favorite movie of all time, or is your favorite movie of all time a different movie?
My favorite movie of all time is The Rocky Horror Picture Show.
I knew that.
It's a great movie.
But I mean, in terms of horror favorites, my favorite horror movies are Blair Witch Project, Stephen King's It from 1990, and Scream. So, yeah.
Oh, and you guys talked about it on the Killer Clowns episode of Hard to Believe, right? Is that
true?
Yes,
of course. Yeah.
Show.
Definitely. That was so fun. I had such a good time doing that with you. Yeah. It was so much fun.
Cool. Wait, so what was the third? So you said Blair Witch, It, and what was the third one?
Scream.
Oh, Scream. Yeah, of course. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Flawless.
It's classic.
So I have a question. Okay. With Rocky Horror, do you like only so is part of your love of it like the participation thing where you throw stuff at the screen, or do you just like watching it on its own? Like, because there's like 2 different versions of that movie, right? There's one where you're like dancing along, and there's one where you're just watching at home.
And maybe, I hadn't actually thought of the fact that these are both like these movies have its own world, and I guess that's obviously something that I am very fond of. But yeah, I mean, I definitely started watching it it was my dad's favorite movie, or it is my dad's favorite movie. So he showed me it when I was, I don't know, like 11 or 12 or something. And I just like absolutely loved it. And I'm sure that had to do with like being a queer kid and not fully understanding it. And it just like resonating with me on some kind of cellular level. But I love musicals as well. And I think the music in it is just absolutely fantastic and bizarre. And it's just pure camp. And yeah, I love going to see it, but it's not like I'm not like a Rocky Horror kid. It just is my favorite movie, and I'm too old to go to midnight showings anymore, so I don't really go. I'm very tired most of the time.
I'd be too old for like a 9 p.m. showing at this point in my life, but
I do want. I ham-fistedly jammed it in earlier, but I do want to shout out once again Racer Trash, who like the bunch of like Hollywood editors who during the pandemic took a bunch of existing movies and recut them and cut in other movies and everything like that, and they did a very good job. It's supremely weird and surreal and like wildly different than the one I talk about when we release our Eyes Wide Shut episode. But their version of Blair Witch is actually longer than the actual Blair Witch Project, and it has almost nothing to do with this movie, even though it has everything to do with the movie. So it's all available for free on the internetarchive.org or whatever that website is. But look, Internet Archive, Racer Trash, and they have blairwitch.pr proj, like Adobe Premiere Project, and it's so weird and good, and I highly recommend that and all their stuff. So check that out. Whether you liked Blair Witch or not, if you're listening to this episode, I think you would appreciate at least checking out. And there's some Jacob's Ladder stuff in there too for you, John. So the overall menacing vibe of Jacob's Ladder is somehow, for some reason, in blairwitch.pr proj. So there you go. That's my plug.
I'm a big fan of that movie.
For some guy I have nothing to do with.
Do it.
Yeah. Chelsey, you've already plugged your show. Do you want to plug anything else before we go?
No.
Awesome. But keep a lookout for the sequels to Blair Witch that will be written by all of us in the near future.
I will plug that. Yes. But
hopefully you'll be back
I would
in the
love
future
to be.
for another episode.
Yes,
and,
anytime.
Having you. Awesome. Chelsey, thanks. Joey, thanks. And we will see you guys in a couple weeks.
Thank you guys.